The Hunter from the Sky. The Thomas Mantell Incident. Chapter 1, Unauthorized Entry and Takeoff Order, 3, 750+ words. A winter day in the shadow of the Cold War. Date, January 7, 1948. Location, Godman Army Airfield, Kentucky. It had barely been 3 years since the end of World War II. The world had escaped the devastation of a hot war but was beginning to feel the freezing breath of the Cold War on its neck. The sky now held not just weather, but nuclear threats and invisible enemies. The American public was on edge, the military was on constant alert. Yet, that Wednesday afternoon started sunny and calm over Kentucky. The routine at Godman Field continued with the metallic sounds of engine maintenance and orders echoing across the tarmac. No one could have predicted that this day would turn into one of the darkest and most controversial pages in aviation history. This story is not about wreckage found in a farmer's field or a couple abducted on a lonely road. This story is about a military engagement. It is the story of a deadly duel between an experienced fighter pilot of the world's most powerful air force and an object perceived as unidentified, gigantic, and hostile. Our protagonist is Captain Thomas F. Mantell. At 25, he is a decorated ace pilot who served in the Normandy landings during World War II. A fearless, skilled soldier accustomed to dominating the skies. Beneath him is the pride of American aviation, a powerful P-51 Mustang fighter plane. Mantell thought his only mission that day was to ferry 4 planes from one base to another. But fate had a completely different plan for him at the edge of the atmosphere, in that death zone where oxygen runs out. Unauthorized entry and takeoff order. Chaos on the ground, there's an umbrella in the sky. The events began in the civilian sphere before reaching the military base. Around 1:15 p.m., the switchboards of the Kentucky State Police began to jam. Hundreds of people from different towns, unaware of each other, were reporting the same thing in a panic. There was a gigantic object in the sky that overshadowed even the sun. Witness testimonies agreed on the immense size of the object, but provided confusing details regarding its shape. A witness from Maysville likened it to a giant flying ice cream cone. Another from Owensboro described it as a huge umbrella with a red tip, hanging in the sky. The most consistent description was this: a silvery, metallic, incredibly bright, and unbelievably large circular object. The police initially thought it was a mass hysteria event. But the situation became serious when reports started coming in from military police near Fort Knox as well. The object was slowly moving south, towards Godman Airfield. At 1:45 p.m., the duty officers at Godman Tower looked outside to confirm the incoming reports. And there it was. The base commander, Colonel Guy Hicks, couldn't believe his eyes when he looked through his binoculars. This was no airplane. It had no wings, tail, or propeller. It wasn't moving like a balloon drifting in the wind, either. It was violating the base's airspace in a fixed, determined, and threatening manner. Colonel Hicks's statement at that moment entered the records: "God, what is that thing? It's as bright as a meteor but it's not moving." The base went on alert. Was this a Soviet spy craft? Or worse, a new type of weapon? As everyone on the ground looked up helplessly, it became clear that the solution would have to come from the sky. The squadron in the sky, Captain Mantell engaged. Meanwhile, completely unaware of the chaos on the ground, Captain Thomas Mantell was leading a flight of 4 P-51 Mustangs belonging to the 165th Fighter Squadron of the Kentucky National Guard. Their mission was simple: they had taken off from a base in Marietta, Georgia, and were ferrying the planes to Standiford Field. Everything was normal in the cockpit of Mantell's plane. The power of the Packard V-1650 Merlin engine vibrated through the airframe, and the gauges showed normal readings. Mantell held the stick with the ease of an experienced pilot. For someone who had seen combat and faced death, this was a boring afternoon flight. The other pilots flying alongside him, Lieutenant Clements, Lieutenant Hammond, and an unnamed fourth pilot, were following their leader. They were low on fuel but had enough to reach their destination. However, as they approached the airspace of Godman Field, routine braking static was heard in their headsets. Godman Tower was calling them with an urgent tone. Radio log, reconstruction. Godman Tower, Able Leader, this is Godman Tower. Do you copy? Over. Mantell, Able Leader, Godman Tower, this is Able Leader. I read you 5 by 5. Go ahead. Godman Tower, Captain Mantell, we have an emergency situation. An unidentified object is reported high to the southwest of the base. You are requested to make visual contact and identify. This is an intercept mission. I repeat, this is an intercept mission. The atmosphere in Mantell's cockpit instantly changed. The terms, unidentified object, and intercept mission meant only one thing to a fighter pilot: threat. Mantell, Roger. Godman. Give me information on the object. Type, altitude. Godman Tower, negative. Able Leader. Type unknown. Size, huge. Altitude uncertain, but appears to be above 15,000 feet. Extremely bright. Exercise caution. Mantell thought for a brief moment. Their fuel was limited. Some of the other pilots might not be experienced enough for this type of mission. But he was a leader, and the base below was under threat. Mantell, to his squadron, all right boys, you heard them. Ferry mission cancelled. We have a new target. Assume formation and follow me. We are beginning the climb. The climb begins, visual contact. Mantell pulled back on the stick and pointed the nose of the P-51 steeply toward the sky. The powerful Merlin engine roared. The 4 planes began to rise like arrows. 5,000, 10,000 feet. The altimeters were spinning rapidly. When they reached 14,000 feet, approximately 4,200 meters, one of Mantell's wingmen called out over the radio. Lieutenant Clements, leader, at 12 o'clock, hi. I see something. Mantell narrowed his eyes. Just above the bright midday sun, in the blue depth of the atmosphere, he saw the thing. What those on the ground called an umbrella, or cone, looked very different and terrifying from the air. Mantell had seen German jets and rockets during the war years, but this resembled nothing made by human hands. Mantell pressed the radio switch. His voice trembled slightly with the shock of the sight. Mantell's first report, historical record. Mantell, Godman Tower, I have the object in sight. I repeat, I see the object. It appears to be metallic, and it is tremendous in size. The officers in the tower listened with bated breath. How big, Captain? Asked a voice. Mantell hesitated for a moment. The object was so far away that for it to appear so clear from this distance meant its size was colossal. Mantell, it's hard to estimate, but it's much larger than a bomber. Maybe 100 meters in diameter. Silver-colored. Reflecting the sun. I am continuing the climb. I'm going to try to close in. As Mantell and his squadron passed 18,000 feet, a major problem emerged. P-51 Mustangs required oxygen masks for high-altitude flights. However, for this routine ferry mission, some of the planes did not have fully charged oxygen tanks or the masks were not worn. The fourth pilot was forced to turn back at 15,000 feet due to lack of oxygen. 3 planes remained. Breaking point, a lone hunter. 22,000 feet, approximately 6,700 meters. The air was thinning, temperatures dropping to freezing levels. Mantell's wingmen, Lieutenants Clements and Hammond, were beginning to struggle. Their planes were approaching their performance limits, and their oxygen was at critical levels. The object was still far above them. It was as if it was toying with them, keeping the distance constant. No matter how fast Mantell went, the metal giant would not let him approach. Lieutenant Clements, over radio captain, I can't climb any higher. My oxygen is about to run out. The engine is starting to sputter. I have to turn back. Lieutenant Hammond, I'm in the same situation, leader. We can't stay at this altitude. Mantell had to make a decision. He couldn't risk his squadron. But as a fighter pilot, turning back without identifying a threat was against his nature. His eyes were locked onto that bright metallic challenge above. He wasn't going down without learning what that thing was. Mantell with a determined voice, Roger Clements, Hammond. You return to base. I'm continuing on. I have to see that thing up close. As the two planes fell behind, Thomas Mantell was now alone in the sky. Below him was a 22,000-foot void, above him, a technology humanity had never encountered. Mantell continued his climb using all the power of his plane. 25,000 feet. 26,000 feet. When he contacted the tower for the last time, the change in his voice was noticeable. Could hypoxia, mental confusion and a feeling of overconfidence, the first sign of oxygen deprivation, have started? Or was he mesmerized by what he saw? Mantell's last clear message. Mantell, the object is directly above me now and appears to be moving at my speed. I am continuing the climb. I'm going to 30,000 feet. If I can't get close by then, I'll abandon the chase. This was the last decision he made as a rational pilot. 30,000 feet, for a P-51, especially without full oxygen support, was the death zone. Entering the death zone. Captain Mantell was approaching the limit he had set for himself. 28,000 feet. The plane's engine was struggling to find oxygen in the thin air. Mantell's vision was starting to blur, his fingertips tingling. Hypoxia was an insidious enemy. It made the pilot feel good while slowly killing him. Silence reigned in Godman Tower below. Colonel Hicks and the others were waiting for the next message to come over the radio. But only static noise and Mantell's heavy breathing came through. What was Mantell thinking at that moment? About who or what was inside that metal giant? Or just the irresistible curiosity a pilot feels toward the unknown? When he reached the 30,000-foot limit, Mantell did not keep his word. He did not turn back. The hunter instinct had triumphed over logic. He continued to climb. And this would be his final climb. In the next chapter, we will witness the tragic end of Thomas Mantell. That final, chilling silence on the radio. The plane's uncontrolled crash to Earth. And the anatomy of the planet Venus, lie concocted by the Air Force to cover up this incident. Can a pilot really die chasing a planet? Or had Mantell seen something in the sky that he shouldn't have? Tune in to part 2 to see the conclusion of this deadly pursuit and continue this tragic tale of heroism with us.